Morning. How's everyone doing? Good. Well, welcome to Refinery Church. We're glad to have you joining us here. If you're joining us online, hello and welcome. Hope you're ready to sing. If you'd like to just stand and join us if you're here, and we're going to sing some songs here together.
When all I see is a battle, you see my victory. When all I see is the mountain, you see a mountain. And as I walk through the shadow, your love surrounds me. There's nothing to fear now, for I am safe. So when I I'll fight on my knees with my hands lifted high. Oh God, the battle belongs to you, and every fear I lay at your feet. I'll sing through the night. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. lungs to sing once again. I will praise Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble, Jesus, Jesus. You silence fear, Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble, Jesus, Jesus. Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble, Jesus, Jesus. You silence fear, Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble, Jesus, Jesus. Your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is alive, forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. Jesus, Jesus. Jesus, Jesus. Your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is alive, forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is alive, forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus.
Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. And you have been so, so kind to me. And all the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. But I couldn't turn it, I don't deserve it, till you give your so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. But I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, there's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. No wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. But I couldn't turn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Join me in prayer this morning. Heavenly Father, God, we just lift you up this morning, God, and we just sing all these words to you. And thank you for your reckless love, God, that is just ever pursuing and just constantly coming after us. And while that might seem intimidating, God, we know that you just have the best intentions in store, and that you just want us to follow you, to be with you, and that that our best life is lived through you, Lord. And I just pray that we would know that. I pray that you would reveal that to us. I pray that you would just continue to seek after us, God, that we would be receptive to that, and that we would hear you coming and just be able to join in that relationship with you, Lord. And it's just this morning that I pray that you would bless these words that are shared, that you would just help us to take them to heart, and God, that you would just be here with us. It's just your name that I pray. Amen.
Am I on? Is this thing? Yeah, good morning all. Good morning online. For those who are gathered in the comfort of your home or somebody else's home, maybe you're gathering together and having a watch party or something like that. I don't know. Can we do that? Is that legal today? I think that's legal. Maybe that's what you're doing. Anyhow, wherever you're watching from, whether you're in-house or in your house, it's great to be here with you today. I'm excited today because we're talking about Jesus. Yeah, and his friends. We get to talk about Jesus and his friends today. And we're doing that because there's this concern that I think preacher guys like me have about churches and how it can happen that a bunch of people might think of church as something that you just go to once a week. Have you ever fallen into that? I think any of us, it's easy to fall into that we just kind of get in that routine of church. It's just that thing that we go to, and we do it for 1 hour once a week, and then we'll see you again next week kind of thing. And we'll ask questions like, well, where do you go to church? As if that's kind of the be-all and end-all somehow. And it's interesting. In the Bible, you read the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John accounts of Jesus, and Jesus never actually said to anybody, thou shalt go to church. That's just not part of his repertoire. Thou shalt go to church. Here's what Jesus did. If you got your Bible, you can look at this now or later. I'm just going to quickly read this. But Mark chapter 3, it reads this way. It says, Jesus went up on a mountainside. He called to him those that he wanted, and they came to him, and he appointed 12 of him that he might be with them and that he might send them out. In other words, Jesus didn't say, thou shalt go to church, and that's the be-all and end-all. Thou shalt go to church, and that's all you need to do. Just go for that 1 hour a week or whatever. He created this entirely new community, this group of people. And at that time, it was just a small group of people. He called 12 of them to himself. And they just did life together. And it was life-changing for everybody. They'd eat together, they learned together, they prayed together, they would do ministry together. That's part of just doing that life together. But these guys, they argued with one another. And they got mad at each other at times, and they got jealous with one another. And sometimes they had these sort of bickering kinds of fights with one another, and they competed with one another, and they got afraid together. They failed together, they celebrated together. And in all of it, they watched each other grow, which I think is just amazing, amazing. In the end, and this is surely as a matter of historical record, they changed the world like no small group of human beings had ever changed it before or have ever changed it since. But it didn't happen because Jesus said to this little group of followers, hey, I just need you to show up once a week for church. I just need you to go to church once a week. He formed, and Jesus would not say that's a bad thing. If you're sitting at home going, yes, I don't have to show up. No, we'd love you to show up. We want to be a part of the community with you. We want you to be a part of this here. We miss those of you who haven't been around for a while, and those of you who have never been here in person. Well, we'd sure like to get a chance to meet you. But Jesus formed this transformational community where his followers, and we just call them disciples, but his followers, they got called, and they were shaped, and then they were sent. They were called, they were shaped, and they were sent. And Jesus is still doing this today. He's still calling today. And he made this staggering promise way back when that still holds true today. Matthew chapter 18 reads this way. It says, wherever 2 or 3 of you are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of you. I think that's a description of life in community. I think that's the sort of with God life in community. In other words, disciples, followers of Jesus Christ, they don't get formed in isolation. You've maybe noticed that before. We don't get formed in isolation. In other words, as well, Jesus, who is always present, is somehow uniquely present in community. In community. In this gathering, in this family that we call the church, wherever 2 or 3 of you are gathered. Here's a little picture of this to try and explain it a little bit, and it's kind of goofy, but stick with me. My dad used to barbecue, and we would go camping, and we had this little barbecue. It was just a portable barbecue, but not like the portable barbecue that I have, where I attach a propane tank to that and fire it up. That barbecue was just sort of a shell, and you would dump charcoal briquettes. Does anybody know what a charcoal briquette is? We used to have a bag of Kingsford that was always traveling with us. Our good friend Kingsford used to come camping with us, and Dad would dump those charcoal briquettes into that tub, that grill, if you will, and then you'd maybe put a little bit of fuel on that, and you'd light them up. And then they'd burn for a while, right? And they'd do really well. And those charcoal briquettes would get red hot. And they'd kind of go grayish, like ash-like, but there's so much heat, and you'd kind of pile them up to generate this heat, and that was your cooking source now, and the grill went over the top and the whole bit, right? And it's funny with those things, because the heat and the fire with the charcoal briquette, it only maintains that heat. It only keeps its strength and its power and the whole bit when those charcoal briquettes sort of stick together. They have to be in community with one another. This is a goofy little picture, but hopefully it makes a little bit of sense. If you take one of those charcoal briquettes and you set it aside from the rest of the group, do you know what happens to it? It loses its glow. And then it loses all of its heat. And then it's just this sort of useless gray chunk. It's just a little picture of what happens when in community we put ourselves in isolation from community. Everybody loves community. I really think that. I really think that everybody loves that aspect of community, the idea of it. I think everybody here would say, you know what, I value the thought of great friendships, and I value the concept of having great experiences together with some other people who are just doing life, that we could walk through life together. I really think there's value in that. I think most of us would say that. I think human beings just in general, and this is sort of the part of the God imprint in your life, in mine, we sort of long to be a part of this band of brothers, band of sisters, band of brothers and sisters, just a little family experience. I don't think what we need in church right now is another talk on the value of community. I think we get it. But I do think what people wonder is, why is it so hard? Why does community seem to be so hard? Why don't I have it? Why can't I seem to find it? Why can't I just ring up the church and order like 4 or 5 permanent, intimate, life-giving, growth-producing best friends? You know, why can't I just do that? Could we have an online feature where I could order that on the website? You know, just 4 or 5 close friends that I can kind of do life with, and they can breathe life into me, and I can encourage them back in the whole bit, right? Wouldn't it be great if we could do that? Wouldn't that be amazing? I think that would be kind of fun. We could just, go online and click the happy meal, and you would get your little family, your little cohort that you could hang out with. In the time that I've got left here, I want to talk about the great barrier to community. What stands in the way of us experiencing the kind of community that Jesus intended for you and for me and for you online, for all of us to experience within the context of his church? And then we're actually going to close this service off by just having a couple of moments. And this is if you want to. It's something you can choose to play or not play. But if you want to, at the end of our service, we're going to have a couple of moments for you to be able to step into community. I'll explain that in a moment here. Because we don't want to just talk about it. Don't want to just be talking about these things. We want to actually do and not just talk about. Years ago, there's a writer and a psychiatrist. His name is Scott Peck. Maybe you've heard of Scott Peck before. He became a Christian many, many years ago. And he had been fascinated with relationships his entire life, and it's why he chose to study what he did. But now he became a follower of Jesus, and he began to take a look at what is God's plan for human community. What is God's plan for these unique sort of interactions between people? And what gets in the way of that community actually taking place, actually happening? And here's part of what Peck talked about. He said that what we long for and what we ache for, we actually might just want to call it authentic community. And it's interesting that he kind of puts that adjective in there, authentic community, which means that there might be other types of community out there, is what he's getting at, right? So he says he thinks what human beings long for is authentic community. And when this takes place, everybody knows it. Everybody's fully aware, because people start to get very real. Life becomes very real. And people get authentic with one another in that kind of authentic community. And the masks come off, not these masks that we're wearing today, but the masks that we wear, in life. The masks come off. Excuse me, and people sort of show up, and they speak truth to one another, and they do that in love, and they know each other, and they are known by each other. And in that kind of authentic community, in that kind of context, you know what happens? Exactly what Jesus said would happen. Lives are changed. Lives are changed. And this is where disciples are formed in true community. And that's a living thing. That's reality. That's a living organism, if you will. There's the right balance between encouragement and challenge. Hear me on that. There's a balance, and it's a right and healthy balance between encouragement and challenge. And as human beings, I think we just ache for that. I think we long for it Even if to this point you would say, I'm not sure I recognize that in myself. But he also said this, he said we often experience something completely different than authentic community. Peck says that there's something that we often experience, and it kind of gets in the way. It kind of gets in the way, and it's what he says we could call it pseudo-community. It's kind of, I don't even know if we'd say community light, but it's like here's the authentic community, and then there's this pseudo-community, this version of community that is not quite up to the authentic community standard. It's kind of a fake version of the real deal. And what happens in that sort of pseudo-community is that we might hang out together. We might get together and kind of hang out, whether it's in a bit larger group or in a bit smaller groups or whatever, and we might be very polite with one another, and indeed quite pleasant even, right? Like this might be the kind of community that we experience, and we're talking to each other, and it's engaging, and it's nice talk, but the primary dynamic of pseudo-community, you know what it is? It's conflict avoidance. Have you been there? Have you been in that type of pseudo-community where the primary objective is conflict avoidance, and we're all very nice to one another, and it's pleasant, and we can talk weather, and we can talk sports when it's going good. That's right now. And we can talk about some things that are good. Now, how's work and how's family life and stuff? But there's conflict avoidance. We will be absolutely pleasant with one another, but we would prefer sort of a superficial kind of shallowness rather than that authentic, deep community that the Jesus community is supposed to be all about. And that doesn't transform anybody. That doesn't change lives. But it goes on all the time. And things kind of get stagnant. And people go, well, I tried the God thing, and I tried a small group, or I tried this, and it didn't really work, and I didn't see, and maybe you wouldn't even voice it, but you think to yourself, you know what, I'm not really sure I'm seeing the life change. But are we in authentic community, or are we in pseudo-community? Because in the pseudo-community, things kind of get boring. And I think all of us have probably experienced this a little bit. And maybe some of you today, you would say, I experienced that, I think, in my marriage. Or I think that's what my experience with small groups has been. Or I experienced that in the workplace. If you could see the office or the place where I work or the shop where I work in, boy, it's that pseudo-community. And so the real question becomes, how do we move from that pseudo, that sort of version of community, that fake version of the real authentic, how do we move from that pseudo-community into authentic, real community? And I don't think it's really easy. I don't think it's an easy sort of thing. And I think it's kind of a scary thing, actually. Peck just, he says that what's required is you got to enter into what he would call the tunnel of chaos. You ever been in the tunnel of chaos? It's not the tunnel of love. It's probably the exact opposite, right? The tunnel of chaos. That doesn't sound much fun. But somebody has to step out of the pseudo and into the real. Somebody has to step into that chaos, the unknown, if you will. And sometimes I think that's why we would see it as chaotic or scary. It's because it's unknown, because the pseudo is all that I've experienced, and the real sounds a little bit intimidating, sounds a little bit scary. Somebody has to take a risk. In order to go from pseudo to real, somebody has to show up. Somebody has to have courage and step up. Somebody has to trust God enough to be able to maybe speak to themselves or to somebody else hard truth. Something like, hey guys, I think there's something going on here that none of us are talking about. But that's always a risk, right? But the question is somebody willing to do this? Or are we just going to sit in pseudo-community if that's what your experience has been? And I'll tell you, this can happen in a church, and it happens in churches all the time. In a church, people can just show up. We can just show up here Sunday after Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, right? We can just make the routine and just go to church week after week and month after month and year after year, and we sit largely in the same place, and we can smile and we can nod at the same faces, and how are you doing? Pretty good. And how are you doing? I'm good too. And then we go for lunch, or we just go home or whatever. But nobody ever really knows who you are, or you never really get to know some other people on a deeper level. Yeah, that's what we don't want. That's what we really don't want. Jesus doesn't want that. As a church, we don't want. That's not the doing life with God. That's not the with God or with other people kind of life. So today, what I want to do here in just the little bit of time that we have left here, I just want to mention a few of the ways that Jesus was constantly modeling going into that tunnel of chaos, if you will, entering into and navigating that, and then just asking for you and me, is this a way that maybe God is calling me to enter into that with God life in community? Because we want to be serious about this at the church. This isn't something that is just sort of superficial. This is really what the with God life is all about, is doing life together with God and with others. So let's just look at a few of these ways. The first way involves a step of initiating community and actually being in authentic relationship. And if you look at the life of Jesus, this happens right at the beginning for Jesus. If you read through the gospel accounts, and I want to share with you something from Matthew chapter 4 here, what Matthew has to say about Jesus right at the front end of his ministry, kind of what was going on and how he approached it. Here's how it reads. It says, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus spent a lot of time around the seas and around the waterfront and stuff. He's walking beside the Sea of Galilee, and he saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. And they were casting a net into the lake because they were fishermen. And so that's what they did, right? They're hunting for fish. And Jesus said to them, come and follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. I will make you fishers of people. It's taken the whole fishing thing to another level, right? It's a whole different thing. I'm going to give you guys community, and I'm going to give you purpose. And they do that. They join up with Jesus immediately. They leave their nets and they come and join in where Jesus is going and what he's doing, and they start to follow it. Immediately, this same scenario plays itself out again. And going on from there, Jesus saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, who would also be the son of Zebedee. And immediately they left their boat and their father, and they followed Jesus. Now, anytime in ancient historical sorts of literature, when you see back-to-back stories like this, in ancient literature, back-to-back repetition like this, and including the Bible, it's sort of a way of underlining something. If there was a highlighter, then this is the section that Matthew would have highlighted. He would have highlighted this section, and instead he just rapid fire tells us these two stories. It's sort of a way of saying, don't miss this because it's incredibly important. Don't miss this because it matters real deeply. Jesus is starting his ministry, and he's not starting by going out and doing tremendous miracles or feeding people or healing or whatever the case may be. Jesus starts by building a little community. Something very unique. Something quite different. Jesus is the only rabbi. He was a Jewish rabbi. He was a teacher. And he's the only rabbi that we know who recruited his learners, who recruited his followers. All rabbis had disciples, they would call them, but every other rabbi that we know of, they actually waited for disciples to approach them. You would go to the teacher, you would go to the rabbi and ask if you could be a part of his little community, of his entourage there that he was teaching and just breathing life into in that way, because it was considered sort of beneath the dignity of the rabbi to go out and kind of troll for students, right? Rabbis just didn't do this because there was a part of it, it's a little bit save and face, because they didn't want to be rejected. Because when you're the one who initiates, when you're the asker, you can get turned down, right? You can get turned down when you're the one on the end of asking. Jesus constantly risked being rejected, but he did it. And that's always difficult. That's always a little bit scary. I think it's part of why we don't initiate community, because there's a risk involved with it. There's a risk involved in initiating. I wonder, and just like sort of staying on the same topic, but just sort of having some fun with this. I wonder how many, or has there anybody here in this room or maybe at home where you've asked somebody out on a date and you got rejected? Anybody? Look around. This is what we call pseudo-community. Yeah, this is exactly what. Let me rephrase the question a little bit, okay? And how many of you have ever rejected somebody else for a date? You got asked and you rejected. Yeah, a few more hands. That's a little more believable now, right? Like we're taking a step out of pseudo towards real. Maybe another question. How many of you wish you would have rejected somebody for a date? Is there anybody? Yeah. And we're digressing a little bit, but when people are involved in community, and that can take different shapes. That can be in a small group. You can find community there. You can find community doing ministry and serving alongside some other people when you get together and you're actively engaging with other folks and stuff. I mean, there's so many different ways, but when people are involved in community and you ask them, how did you get involved? How did you get involved? You know what the number one response is to that? Somebody asked me. Somebody invited me. And on the other hand, when people are not involved, when they're not connecting in a smaller group, or they're not engaging in service, or they're not engaging in ministry, or whatever the case may be, and you're asked, why are you not involved? Does anybody want to guess what the number one answer is to that one? It's because nobody asked me. It's because nobody asked. And so, ask. I think it's really the first step. I think God might be calling you to be intentional about seeking authentic community if you've never done it previously. I got to tell you, there's so many great people to learn from in this church family. It's absolutely amazing. We have so many folks that you can learn from at our church, and I'm telling you, if you find that you have been sort of just doing the going to church thing, that I show up for the Sunday deal and that's it, but I'm not in true community, could I really challenge you and encourage you to ask, to pray, to begin by asking God, would you just guide me in all of this? I mean, who are some folks that maybe I could take a next step with? Maybe, God, you could direct my steps towards some people, and make a commitment to yourself that you're going to get out of that kind of permanent visitor category, that you're going to take a step towards community, towards authentic community, by maybe asking somebody. And I'll say this too, some of you have been following Jesus for a long time, and you have so much to offer. But you think, I'm not the right person, or my age is, I'm either too young or I'm too old, or somebody else can do it, or whatever. Some of you have been following Jesus for so long, you've got so much to offer, but it's been years since you've come alongside somebody else who maybe is a little bit disconnected, and you've come alongside somebody else to invite them into relationship. Tell you, I learned a long time ago, it was right around the time that we were starting this church up, that people are not mostly looking just for friendly people when they come to a church. People are looking for friends. People are looking to build relationships. And maybe you want to pray, God, would you give me a new adventure in relationship? Would you just give me a new adventure in friendship with somebody who maybe right now does not have that person who can step up and help them in their walk with you, God. So, okay, that's sort of the first ask step, if you will. And maybe that's your step. Maybe that's where you need to step. Another step is the risk of challenging one another. And this is going to sound so scary to so many of us. Spiritual growth is not a neutral kind of process. Spiritual growth it's a battle against sin. And Jesus is always doing this kind of challenge, this kind of step up, step up, step up. He's constantly challenging people in his little community to step into a deeper devotion with God, to step into genuine transformation of character. That it's not just enough to show up, but let's look at how am I going to get involved in life change so that I am becoming more like Christ, so that I can move from that pseudo sort of community into an authentic, life-giving, life-breathing community. In pseudo community, when unpleasant topics come up, you know what we do? We try to smooth them over. An unpleasant topic comes up and we just try to smooth it over, right? And we like to change the topic. Maybe you're one of those topic changer type of people, because it's like, something just came up and it's awkward and this is making me feel nervous, and so you're going to change the topic, right? And we do that all the time in pseudo community. See, I don't know if Jesus ever got really nervous. It doesn't seem like Jesus was a nervous kind of guy. Instead of avoiding tension, which we like to do, instead of avoiding difficulty, Jesus would often surface it, because he knew that that's where true growth lies. One time, the disciples were having some problems with one another, and they were walking along, and everybody was talking, and there was some chatting going on, and they sort of spread out a little bit, and they come to a stop, and we're told that Jesus turned and he asked the disciples, "What was it that you guys were talking about back there?" And they're like, yeah, we're just having a bit of a disagreement back here. We were arguing a little, but here's how it reads. This is what Mark says. They kept quiet because they were arguing about who amongst them was the greatest. Muhammad Ali wasn't even in the group. It's just amazing. And they were like, "I'm the greatest." And then the next one was, "I think I'm the greatest." And there was a dozen of them. And so, can you imagine? It was just nuts, right? And Jesus finally "What is it that you guys are arguing about?" Oh, nothing. And notice the little phrase, "but they kept quiet." I think that phrase sums up perfectly what goes on in pseudo community. They kept quiet. There's this difficulty, there's this thing, there's this tension, but oh my goodness, nobody name it, okay? Just, can we walk around it a little bit here? Can we avoid it as much as possible, right? There's tension there or something. We're not going to name it. We're not going to talk about it. I mean, certainly not with Jesus. Oh my goodness. For those disciples, they would have went, "This could be very embarrassing for us." Yeah, Jesus, we're talking about which one of us is the best. Right? Jesus would have looked at him and went, "Are you joking?" That stuff's sort of scary. And so we say, you know what? We're not going to do it. That's pseudo community. And Jesus never lets his community remain pseudo. He's always pulling people towards true community. He's always pulling people and encouraging and nudging people towards authentic biblical community. And he does that right here. "Hey guys, what is it that you were arguing about there? What is it that you were talking about?" And then they got to talk about it. And then it becomes this incredible teachable moment to be challenged, as Jesus does, into a life of humble servanthood, which Jesus modeled all the way to the cross. In great communities, people move towards, not away from, tension. They move towards that sort of stuff, and they figure out how to navigate that sorts of stuff. Not just trying to be edgy for the sake of being edgy. You met somebody like that who's just like, "I'm just going to be here for the angst. That's my middle name, right? I'm going to be edgy just for the sake of." I mean, that's not what we're talking about here. But we go to those places that are sometimes scary, or sometimes they're a little bit difficult, or there's sometimes some tension there, because those are usually the broken places that we need to go to if we're going to grow. And my hope is that we're here today because we'd like to see some growth. Because as followers of Jesus Christ, that's what we're shooting for. The Apostle Paul says this. He says, "I'm convinced that you are competent to admonish one another." That's the Greek word that he uses, translated into English, admonish one another. In great communities, that happens. People admonish and people get admonished. It's kind of a partner with encouraging. It's not a standalone, but it partners up with encouragement. It's like we're so much more comfortable with encouragement. Right? We're so much more comfortable with encouraging one another. That's the one another that we like to do. That's the one that we can do. But the admonish one another, I just want to crawl under something, right? We just want to avoid that kind of thing. But man, encouraging people, that's just nice. It's polite. Everybody likes it. It's not chaotic. It's not messy. People in pseudo community will encourage the daylights out of one another. It's all about that, right? But boy, to admonish. Paul says, you know what? With the Spirit of God, that's something that you can do, and it's something that we should be doing. See, here's the danger with all of this, and why I think Paul starts to talk this way and says that this admonishment goes right alongside with encouragement. The danger is this. The Bible, for example, says something. It says a lot about being generous, okay? We'll just use that as the example. It says you ought to be generous. Well, we can come to church and we can hear sermons, we can hear messages, we can go to youth group and young adult group or small group, and we can learn all about being generous, and we can do our own Bible study on that. And if you want, you can go learn Greek and you can go learn Hebrew words and all this stuff and understand exactly what generous means. And then we sit back and we think, man, I really accomplished something. That group, we did 6 weeks talking about generosity. That was amazing, wasn't it? Yeah, what a great group. And the coffee was excellent, right? It's that kind of thing, right? And we think we've accomplished something, and we think, wow, I'm really growing spiritually. When Jesus in Luke chapter 6, when he says, give freely and be generous. Just let me ask you, what do you think he expects followers to do? When he says, give freely and be generous. What do you think the expectation is on his part of people who would choose to follow him? It's actually be generous. See, we don't like the tension, right? It's actually be generous. If we're not being generous, then we haven't achieved anything by simply learning about it. So the goal for us is not to learn more about generosity. The goal is to become generous. Our goal is to not learn about what it means to forgive. Our goal isn't to understand forgiveness, all the nuances and everything. Our goal is not to understand it. Our goal is to actually forgive. Our goal is not to talk about and learn about joy. It's actually to rejoice and be joyful people, regardless of circumstances. Our goal is not to learn about prayer. The goal is that you actually might pray boldly, big prayers. The only way people learn to actually do the stuff that Jesus talked about is the same way that I think they learned it in Jesus' day. I think that's how we learn it today, the same way that they learned in Jesus' day. And that's to get in some community with other followers of Jesus who are just doing life together, right? We're all walking the same planet. We're all doing life together and cheering each other on and admonishing each other, which means that we hold one another accountable, that somebody might hold me accountable to my walk with Jesus Christ. And I could do the same for somebody else. So maybe the risk that God is calling you to take is moving out of that pseudo community by actually challenging and being challenged. Listening when somebody challenges you on something. Being able to step up and maybe challenge somebody else on something and walk alongside with them in the process. Okay, one more thing. There's a risk of asking. There's that sort of deal, that initiating community. And then there's a risk of kind of stepping up and challenging and being part of not just encouragement, but also that admonishing or that challenge kind of thing. There's a risk in that. But then there's a real risky step in this authentic kind of community, or moving from pseudo to real, and that is vulnerability. That's a word we love, isn't it? Don't you just want to be vulnerable? I mean, don't you wake up in the morning and think to yourself, man, I hope today I could be so vulnerable. Does anybody do that? Does anybody pray that would be their deal today? I just want to be vulnerable in community. Jesus' disciples, he calls these guys to do life with him. And then Jesus didn't hide life. Jesus did life with them. And so Jesus' disciples saw Jesus. They saw him not just when things were going really well. They didn't just see Jesus when he did something miraculous. And it was like everybody looked at him and went, wow, Jesus, that's amazing. And oh my goodness, what is happening here? And they were like, man, we're following that guy. He's my friend and stuff. They didn't just see Jesus when things were going really well. They saw Jesus when he was wiped out. Ever been there? They saw Jesus when he was tired. At 5 o'clock when there was a tough day and all he wanted to do was sit down and take a rest. They saw Jesus in those moments. Have you been in those moments? They saw Jesus when he was hungry. They saw Jesus when he was angry. They saw Jesus when he was rejected. That's a tough place to be in. You ever been in a spot where you're watching your best friend who you've been closely doing life with, and they're getting rejected? They saw that in Jesus. At the moment of Jesus' greatest crisis in life, we're told that Jesus began to be filled with sorrow and filled with trouble. And instead of hiding all of that, and instead of just kind of pushing it all down and saying, okay, I got to toughen up here. I got to handle this on my own. I got to figure out some way to get through this. I'm going to be tough. I'm going to be strong and mentally this and that. The disciples, do you know what they did not get from Jesus? They didn't get from Jesus, hey guys, watch me right now, because you're going to see some incredible courage. You are going to see some masculinity. You are going to see some toughness in action. That's not what Jesus did. He didn't say any of that. Instead of pretending to be fine, here's what Jesus actually said to his friends. He said, guys, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Well, that's just being vulnerable. That's just being honest. How are you doing today? Have you ever responded by saying, you know what, I feel like my soul's just crushed, overwhelmed to the point of death? If Jesus can be that vulnerable, I mean, who the heck am I to hide? Who are you to hide? I mean, we live in a culture where image management is like an art, isn't it? Yes, it is. Pseudo-community. I'm telling you, image management is an art form these days. Social media is where you form your image that you want people to see, right? That's such a prominent sort of thing for us these days. We don't want to be like that. We don't want to pretend. It's so odd. We think that somehow people are going to think better of us. We think somehow that people might think more highly of us. And instead, you know what that does? It just isolates us. Like a charcoal briquette that's over here when the rest of the pile's over here, all hot and toasty. And they're like, nah. It isolates us. When we come together and we're open with one another and we're honest with one another, just in my weakness and in my failure and in all those scary things where we don't like it, but that's being vulnerable. When I'm just honest about those things, about my humanness, people long for that. They long for not just the ability to hear that from you, but to be able to express that. To share, my soul is here. And sometimes that's in a really good place. And I just want some people to celebrate with me because God's doing some incredible things. But then there's those times where my soul feels overwhelmed to the point of death. When the Jesus community got formed 2,000 years ago, and it was growing. It was like growing like crazy. You know what happened was in all sorts of places, starting in Jerusalem and then going to places like Ephesus and then keep going around the Mediterranean. It got to places like Corinth, and then eventually it got right into Italy and it got to Rome, right? And it just kept spreading in all sorts of places. And what people saw in all those places was folks would see people together who were never together. It was really bizarre because all of a sudden Jewish people were hanging out with non-Jewish people, Gentiles. Jews and Gentiles were seen together. Slaves were seen with free people. Rich people were seen with poor people. Males and females were seen together in different environments like that. Oilers fans and Flames fans were seen together. I'm telling you, this Jesus community, wow. And they were talking about strange, I'm just making sure you're with me. They were talking about strange stuff. They were talking about some guy who died on a cross, and they were talking about a resurrection. But there was something about the way they talked. And there was something about the way they laughed together and engaged with one another. There was something about the way they cried together. There was something about the way that they celebrated and shared what they had with one another. This strange kind of commitment that they seemed to make to each other. and the way that people were embraced in those communities, those little communities. And people looked at that all the way from Jerusalem to Rome and all the way to Edmonton now. And people looked at it and they said, you know what? I kind of want in on that. I long for something like that. I don't understand everything that they're talking about, not at all. But I think I want what they've got. And that kind of thing can happen again and again and again. It's not just reserved for 2,000 years ago. By any means, it still happens today, and it can still happen. And the reason it can is because from the very beginning, God's plan was the creation of community right here on earth. He created a planet, and he created men and women, and he said, we're going to have community with himself included. There was once a time when a man named Jesus built this little community, just like that, and then he sent his Spirit, and that community just exploded all over the place on this planet. And that can happen in your neighborhood. And that can happen in your school. And that can happen in your workplace. And that can happen in our church family and in all the different arenas of life that we find ourselves in. That can happen in your marriage, and it can happen in your family. So this is how I want to close today. I told you we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to have a little bit of fun here. And you don't have to do this, okay? I just want to make sure that we're very clear on that. You don't have to do this. But if you want to, you can. And we're not looking at anybody sideways because they choose to or because they don't choose to. There's too much divisive stuff in our world right now anyhow. I'm not looking to create more. But here's what I'm going to invite you to do if you would like to. Would you just spend a few moments connecting with a few people right around where you're at today? Online, this is going to be maybe a little bit trickier if you're sitting by yourself. A lot of times, something about church. People come to church and they often find themselves sitting in the same place. Have you noticed that? I do. I know exactly where everybody sits. And I sit up here and I'm talking and I'm thinking, yeah, oh yeah, that's exactly where you should be. Yeah, we're all in our places with masks on. But you're sitting in the same place as you usually do, and that's your hood. You ought to get to know your neighbors, don't you think? Don't you think? What a sad thing. What a sad thing if folks would come to church, of all places, and never get to know anybody, would never get to be known. You know, you're maybe one conversation away from a friendship that might change your life. It could be kind of your next step in all of this, but whatever can help you take that next step, I think it'd be great. So I just wanted to make a few moments here for just connection, because we don't want to be a part of a family or go to a place where people just go somewhere once a week and just attend once a week kind of thing, which is good. We encourage that. And come on, you onliners, we'll see you soon, hopefully. We don't want to be a place where that is just, we'll go once a week kind of thing. So just here's a couple questions. We'll put some questions on the screen here for you. These are some questions that you can ask the folks in your little neighborhood right where you're sitting there. One of them is this: how do you look so young for your age? And there's a good starter, right? Just a little icebreaker. How do you look so young for your age? And you could ask a couple of folks that. Or if you want to go just a little bit deeper, you could ask them something like, what first brought you to Refinery Church? What first brought you here? Why did you come? How did you end up here? Whatever. Or you want to go a little bit deeper, you can say to them, is there something that I can pray for with you? What can I pray for you? Is there something that I can pray for? And I just want to invite you to meet a few people who you've not met. There's not tons of us in here, but there are people that you've not met. And would you just maybe ask them a question? You ask them your own question. Maybe there's somebody you've wished you could talk to and you've been afraid to engage with, and you just want to hear their story a little bit. Would you do that? Would you pray for somebody before you leave? And then we're done, okay? Like, nobody's coming back up to do a closing prayer. There's not a closing song or anything. But right now, I just think the Spirit of God is at work, and you never know what can happen in these sorts of moments. And there's no pressure, okay? Once again, if you need to leave, if you want to leave, if you don't like people, if you're really introverted, I mean, honestly, don't feel trapped, okay? You're not. Nobody's looking at you sideways. If you gotta go, 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 go. But if you want to, please connect with some people. Just build little neighborhoods right in the room here kind of thing. Get to know a few people, bless some folks, and God bless you, and we'll see you again next week. Have a great week.